My husband Marcus stood at our front door with his mistress, suitcases in hand, telling me I had 1 hour to pack my things and get out of the house I had paid for. What he didn't know was that I had already transferred the deed into my name only, changed every lock, and canceled his credit cards. The look on his face when his key didn't work was just the beginning of my revenge. My name is Paisley, and I'm 32 years old. Until 6 months ago, I thought I had the perfect life in our sprawling colonial mansion in Greenwich, Connecticut. I was the chief marketing officer at a Fortune 500 tech company, pulling in a 7-figure salary while my husband Marcus worked as a mid-level insurance agent, making barely $60,000 a year. Our life looked picture-perfect from the outside: luxury cars in the circular driveway, designer furniture throughout our 6,000-square-foot home, and expensive vacations to Europe twice a year. What people didn't know was that I had paid for everything. The house, the cars, the lifestyle. It was all funded by my success, while Marcus contributed what amounted to pocket change. I didn't mind because I loved him, or at least I thought I did. We had been together for 8 years, married for 5, and I believed we were building something beautiful together. That illusion shattered on a Tuesday evening in October when I came home early from a business trip to Paris. I had wrapped up negotiations on a multi-million-dollar acquisition ahead of schedule and decided to surprise Marcus with an early return. The surprise, however, was on me. I pulled into our driveway at 7 p.m., noting that Marcus's BMW was already there along with a red convertible I didn't recognize. The house was lit up, music playing softly from our sound system, and I could see figures moving around in our living room through the floor-to-ceiling windows. I walked through our front door expecting to find Marcus, maybe entertaining a colleague or watching a game with friends. Instead, I found him slow dancing in our marble foyer with a petite blonde woman in a tight red dress. Her hands were wrapped around his neck, his were on her waist, and they were so lost in each other that they didn't notice me standing there for a full 30 seconds. "What the hell is this?" I said, my voice echoing off the vaulted ceilings. They sprang apart like teenagers caught by parents. Marcus's face went through several shades of red before settling on defensive anger. The woman, who looked like she was barely 25, just smirked at me like I was interrupting her party. "Paisley," Marcus stammered, "you're not supposed to be back until Thursday." "Clearly," I replied, setting down my Louis Vuitton travel bag with deliberate calm. "So, this is what you do when I'm working to pay for this house? Bring your girlfriend here." "She's not my girlfriend," Marcus said quickly, then caught himself. "I mean, it's complicated." The blonde woman laughed, a sound like breaking crystal. "Oh, honey, it's not complicated at all. I'm Amber, and Marcus has been telling me all about how he's ready to start fresh with someone who actually appreciates him." "Appreciates him?" I repeated, feeling anger building in my chest like a rising tide. "Appreciates what exactly?" "His inability to contribute more than 10% to our household expenses? His complete dependence on my career for this lifestyle?" "You don't understand," Marcus said, stepping closer to Amber in what looked like a protective gesture. "Amber makes me feel valued for who I am, not what I can provide financially." "That's convenient," I said coldly, "considering you can't provide anything financially." Amber moved forward, her cheap perfume wafting toward me as she invaded my personal space. "Listen, Paisley, Marcus told me how controlling you are about money. How you make him feel small because you earn more. That's no way to treat a man." I stared at this woman who was standing in my foyer, wearing what was probably a knockoff designer dress, lecturing me about my marriage to the man I had been supporting for 8 years. The audacity was breathtaking. "Get out," I said quietly. "Actually," Marcus said, straightening his shoulders in a way that suggested he had been planning this moment, "we need to talk about that." "About who's leaving?" He walked over to our mahogany side table and picked up a manila envelope that I hadn't noticed before. "Amber and I have been together for 6 months, Paisley. I'm done pretending this marriage is working. I'm done living in your shadow, feeling like a kept man." "You are a kept man," I pointed out. "Not anymore," he said, holding out the envelope. "I've filed for divorce. And since this is my house too, I think it's time you found somewhere else to stay while we work things out." I took the envelope with hands that somehow remained steady despite the shock coursing through my system. Inside were divorce papers listing irreconcilable differences and a request for 50% of all marital assets, including our house. "You want me to leave?" I asked, looking up from the papers. "Just temporarily," Marcus said, though Amber's satisfied smile suggested otherwise. "Until we can figure out a fair division of everything." "Fair division," I repeated slowly, "of the house I bought with my money, furnished with my salary, and maintained with my income while you contributed practically nothing?" "Marriage is a partnership," Amber chimed in. "In Connecticut, spouses are entitled to half of everything acquired during the marriage. Marcus has rights." I looked at this 20-something woman who was apparently now an expert in Connecticut divorce law and felt something cold settle in my stomach. This wasn't a spontaneous affair. This was calculated. "You've been planning this," I said, the pieces falling into place. "Both of you." Marcus had the decency to look uncomfortable, but Amber just shrugged. "Smart women plan ahead, honey. Unlike some people who just throw money around thinking it buys loyalty." That's when I realized the full scope of what was happening. This wasn't just about Marcus wanting out of our marriage. This was about Amber seeing an opportunity to get her hands on half of my wealth through him. She had seduced my husband as a business strategy. "I want you out tonight," Marcus said, trying to regain control of the conversation. "Amber's moving in tomorrow, and it would be awkward for everyone if you're still here." I stood in the foyer of the house I had bought, looking at my husband and his mistress who were trying to kick me out so they could play house with my money. The marble floors I had chosen, the crystal chandelier I had saved for, the custom millwork I had commissioned. They wanted to take all of it and exclude me from it. "1 hour," Marcus said, checking his Rolex, the one I had bought him for our anniversary last year. "Pack what you need, and we'll figure out the rest through lawyers." I nodded slowly, picking up my suitcase. 1 hour. Got it. As I walked up our curved staircase toward our master bedroom, I could hear them behind me, already making plans for redecorating. Amber was talking about replacing my carefully chosen artwork with something more fun and youthful. Marcus was agreeing with everything she said, like a man who had been hypnotized. In our bedroom, I sat on the edge of our king-sized bed and tried to process what had just happened. 8 years of my life, 5 years of marriage, and this was how it ended, with my husband kicking me out of my own house for a woman who saw him as a meal ticket. But as the initial shock wore off, something else took its place. Cold, calculating fury. Marcus and Amber thought they were so clever, but they had made one crucial mistake. They assumed I was just a high-earning woman who had gotten comfortable and careless about protecting her assets. They had no idea who they were really dealing with. I hadn't become a C-suite executive at 32 by being naive or unprepared. I hadn't built my career and wealth by letting people take advantage of me. And I certainly hadn't survived in the cutthroat world of corporate tech by rolling over when someone tried to steal from me. I pulled out my phone and started making calls. The first call was to Janet Morrison, the smartest divorce attorney in Connecticut and a woman I had worked with on several corporate acquisitions. She answered on the second ring. "Paisley? It's kind of late for a business call." "This isn't business, Janet. It's personal. I need you to tell me something about Connecticut property law." Over the next 30 minutes, Janet explained something that Marcus and his amateur legal advisor Amber had apparently overlooked. While Connecticut was indeed an equitable distribution state, that didn't automatically mean a 50-50 split. Courts considered several factors, including each spouse's financial contribution to acquiring marital assets. More importantly, any property owned before the marriage or acquired through individual inheritance or gift remained separate property. And here's where Marcus and Amber's plan fell apart. I had owned our house before we got married. "The house was purchased entirely with your premarital assets?" Janet confirmed. "Completely. I bought it 6 months before Marcus and I got engaged. The deed has always been in my name only. Then, he has no claim to it whatsoever. Connecticut law is very clear on this point. The second call was to my private banker, who confirmed that all of our accounts were set up exactly as I remembered. While we had one joint checking account that we used for household expenses, all of my investment accounts, savings, and the account connected to my salary remained in my name only. Marcus had access to our joint account, which typically held around $5,000 at any given time. The third call was to David Chun, my company's head of security and a former FBI investigator who had helped us with corporate espionage cases. I asked him to run a comprehensive background check on one Amber specifically. I wanted to know about her financial situation, employment history, and whether she had any connections to divorce-related fraud. How quickly do you need this? David asked. I'm paying overtime rates. I need it tonight. While I waited for David's report, I began phase 1 of my counterattack. I accessed my online banking and systematically removed Marcus from every account where he had authorized user status. I canceled the credit cards I had given him. I changed the passwords on all of our streaming services, our security system, and our household accounts. Then I called a locksmith. I need all the locks changed on my house, I told the 24-hour service. Tonight. I'll pay double the normal rate. Ma'am, it's almost midnight. I understand. How quickly can you be here? David's report came through at 1 a.m., and it was even better than I had hoped. Amber Richmond was 26 years old, unemployed, and had been evicted from her last 2 apartments for non-payment of rent. More interesting was her relationship history. She had been briefly married to 2 other men in the past 4 years, both times to older men with assets significantly larger than their income would suggest. In other words, Amber was a professional gold digger, and Marcus was just her latest mark. But the most damning piece of information was a series of text messages David had recovered from social media accounts and cloud backups. Messages between Amber and a friend named Crystal, dating back 7 months. Found a new target. One message read, "Insurance guy married to a tech executive. She travels constantly for work. Easy pickings." Another message, sent 3 weeks ago, got him to file for divorce. Connecticut is a 50-50 state. If I play this right, I'll walk away with half a multi-million-dollar house and a steady income stream from spousal support. The locksmith finished his work at 2:30 a.m. I now had the only keys to my house, and the old locks were sitting in a pile by my garbage cans. I also had Marcus's belongings packed neatly in boxes by the front door, along with a printed copy of every message David had uncovered. At 3 a.m., I texted Marcus, "Your things are outside. Locks have been changed. Don't come back." His response was immediate. "You can't do this. This is my house too." I replied with a photo of the deed, highlighting the date of purchase and my name as the sole owner. Actually, it's not. Never was. Check your facts before you try to steal someone's property. My phone rang immediately. I let it go to voicemail. It rang again. Then again. After the 5th call, I turned it off and went asleep in my own bed in my own house for the first time in months, feeling like I was in control of my own life. The next morning brought a flurry of activity. Marcus and Amber arrived at 8 a.m. I watched them through my security cameras as Marcus tried his key in the front door. The confusion on his face when it didn't work was priceless. They found his boxes on the doorstep, along with a note directing them to contact my attorney for any further communication. Amber was not handling the situation well. I could see her gesticulating wildly as Marcus read through the printed text messages, watching her face go from confused to panicked as she realized her private conversations had been exposed. They pounded on my front door for 20 minutes, demanding I let them in to discuss this like adults. I remained in my kitchen, sipping coffee and reviewing the acquisition contracts I needed to finish for work, occasionally glancing at the security monitor to watch their increasingly desperate attempts to regain access to what they had assumed was their new love nest. Finally, they gave up and drove away. But I knew they would be back with lawyers, threats, and whatever leverage they thought they could manufacture. I was ready for all of it. Janet Morrison arrived at my house at 10 a.m. with a preliminary response to Marcus's divorce filing. She had worked through the night to prepare a counterclaim that was nothing short of devastating. Based on the evidence you've provided, Janet explained as we sat in my living room, we're claiming fraudulent inducement to marriage, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and conspiracy to commit theft. We're also asking for full attorney's fees and damages. What kind of damages are we talking about? Well, you supported him for 8 years. We can calculate the difference between what he contributed to the household and what he consumed in terms of housing, food, transportation, insurance, vacations. It's substantial. She handed me a preliminary calculation that made my eyebrows rise. Marcus owed me approximately $340,000 in net contributions to our lifestyle over the course of our marriage. Can we actually collect that? In Connecticut, if we can prove the marriage was entered into fraudulently or that there was a conspiracy to defraud you of marital assets, absolutely. And Amber's text messages are smoking gun evidence of exactly that. The real fireworks started when Marcus received Janet's counterclaim. He called me from a blocked number, screaming about how I was being vindictive and unreasonable. Paisley, this is insane. You can't claim I owe you money for our marriage. Actually, I can. Especially when you and your girlfriend were planning to defraud me from the beginning. We weren't defrauding anyone. I fell in love with a woman who explicitly targeted you as a meal ticket. Check the text messages, Marcus. She called you easy pickings. The silence on the other end of the phone was satisfying. Finally, Marcus spoke again, his voice smaller. Those messages, they're taken out of context. Really? Which context makes, if I play this right, I'll walk away with half a multi-million-dollar house sound innocent. More silence. Marcus, I continued. You have 2 choices. You can withdraw your divorce filing, sign a separation agreement that leaves you with nothing but your personal belongings and walk away quietly. Or we can go to court, where a judge will see every message, every financial record, and every piece of evidence that shows how you and Amber tried to steal my house and my money. That's not fair. Fair. I laughed. You tried to kick me out of my own house for a woman who sees you as a paycheck. You filed for divorce asking for half of assets you never contributed to. You brought your mistress into our home and told me I had 1 hour to pack my things. And you're worried about fair? Over the next 2 weeks, Marcus made several attempts to negotiate a better deal. He hired his own lawyer, a cut-rate attorney who clearly didn't understand the strength of my position. They tried to argue that Amber's messages were illegally obtained, but David Chun had been careful to use only information that was publicly accessible or had been shared willingly. They tried to claim that Marcus deserved spousal support based on the lifestyle he had become accustomed to during our marriage. Janet shut that down by pointing out that spousal support was intended to help a lower-earning spouse maintain their standard of living, not to subsidize their adultery. They even tried to argue that I had been emotionally abusive by flaunting my higher income, making Marcus feel inadequate. That backfired spectacularly when Janet presented evidence of all the gifts I had bought Marcus, the vacations I had funded, and the allowance I had been giving him for his personal expenses. Amber, meanwhile, had apparently moved on to greener pastures. David's continued surveillance showed her dating a divorced real estate developer within a week of the locks being changed. She had learned that Marcus was not going to be the meal ticket she had hoped for and had apparently decided to cut her losses. Marcus, abandoned by his co-conspirator and facing a legal battle he couldn't afford, finally agreed to my terms. He signed a separation agreement that gave him no claim to any marital assets, waived any right to spousal support, and agreed to pay my attorney's fees. In return, I agreed not to pursue the fraud charges or the $340,000 in damages. The divorce was finalized 6 weeks after Marcus had tried to kick me out of my own house. He walked away with his personal belongings, his BMW, which was in his name and which he could barely afford the payments on, and absolutely nothing else. But the story doesn't end there. 3 months after our divorce was final, I received a call from David Chen with an interesting update. Marcus had been arrested for insurance fraud, charged with filing false claims and collecting money for damages that never occurred. It turns out that during our marriage, he had been supplementing his income by filing fraudulent insurance claims, using his position at the company to manipulate the system. The investigation had been ongoing for over a year, but Marcus's sudden lifestyle change after our divorce, moving from a mansion to a studio apartment, trading his BMW for a used Honda, had triggered additional scrutiny from federal investigators who were looking into patterns of suspicious activity. When I met with the FBI agents handling the case, they told me something that made my blood run cold. Marcus had been planning to disappear after our divorce settlement, taking whatever money he could get from me and vanishing before the insurance fraud charges were filed. Amber had been in on that plan too, which explained her sudden departure when she realized he wasn't going to get the windfall they had expected. Your quick action in protecting your assets probably prevented a much larger theft, Agent Rodriguez explained. If he had succeeded in getting half your house and savings, we might never have been able to track him down or recover the money he stole from insurance claims. Marcus was sentenced to 3 years in federal prison and ordered to pay restitution of over $200,000 to the insurance companies he had defrauded. Amber was charged as an accomplice and received 18 months, though she served most of her sentence in a minimum security facility. As for me, I threw myself into my work with renewed focus and energy. Without the stress of a failing marriage and a partner who was secretly stealing from me, my career flourished. I was promoted to Chief Innovation Officer 6 months after my divorce, with a compensation package that pushed my annual income well into the 8-figure range. I also started dating again, but with a much clearer understanding of what I was looking for in a partner. I wasn't interested in supporting another man's lifestyle or being someone's retirement plan. I wanted an equal, someone who brought their own success and ambition to the relationship. I found that in Dr. James Hartford, a successful neurosurgeon who owned his own practice and had built his wealth through the same kind of hard work and dedication that had built mine. We met at a charity gala where we were both major donors, and our first conversation was about the satisfaction of earning success rather than inheriting it or manipulating others for it. Today, I'm sitting in my home office, the same house that Marcus tried to steal, working on a merger that will make me one of the youngest female CEOs in the tech industry. The view from my window looks out over the gardens that I've had redesigned, past the new security gate that ensures my privacy, toward a future that belongs entirely to me. But here's the twist that no one saw coming, not even me. The insurance fraud investigation that Marcus was caught in had uncovered a much larger scheme involving dozens of agents across multiple states. The FBI's case against the entire network was built largely on evidence they had gathered from Marcus's files and computers, evidence that included detailed records of his fraudulent activities during our marriage. As the victim of his fraud, I was entitled to a substantial portion of the recovered funds. The restitution payment I received wasn't just the $200,000 he owed to insurance companies. It was my share of over $2 million recovered from the entire fraud network. The man who tried to steal my house and my future inadvertently made me even wealthier than I had been before I met him. The revenge I had planned was nothing compared to the justice the legal system ultimately delivered. Sometimes the best revenge isn't something you plan or execute yourself. Sometimes it's simply protecting what's yours and letting karma handle the rest. Marcus thought he was clever enough to manipulate the system and steal from me, but his own greed and criminal behavior ultimately destroyed him more thoroughly than any revenge I could have devised. The locks I changed that night weren't just about keeping him out of my house. They were about locking away a chapter of my life where I had been naive enough to trust someone who saw me as a target rather than a partner. Now I know the difference, and I'll never make that mistake again. The ultimate twist reveals that Marcus was involved in a massive insurance fraud scheme throughout their marriage, using Paisley as unwitting cover for his crimes. His attempt to steal her house led to his arrest when his sudden lifestyle change after the failed divorce triggered federal investigation. Paisley not only kept her assets, but received a $2 million restitution payment as a victim of his fraud network, making her wealthier than ever while Marcus went to prison.